Hello, hello. I am Karen Jean-François.
And I'm Cecilia Oliveira.
And this is the Women in Data podcast.
Every other week, we bring you conversations with inspiring women who are shaping the world of data.
We dive into stories, explore challenges, and share insights and learning to help you navigate your own career in this exciting field.
And sometimes it's just the two of us, candidly chatting about our experience or topics we're curious about. Let's get straight to it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Women in Data podcast. I am super excited about today's conversation because we're speaking with Jackie Clayton, and I've been wanting to bring Jackie on the podcast for a while now. I remember at the Women in Data flagship event earlier this year, I remember grabbing Jackie saying, "Hey Jackie, you have to come on the podcast." And I don't know if you remember, Jackie, you were just walking by and being like, "Okay, can I go now?"
I definitely remember.
But not only you are the one of the data professionals I find the most inspiring, but we're also talking about a topic that is very close to my heart and I know is very important to a lot of people who work in data. And that's around learning and the challenges around learning in our field and how we can really create a learning culture. So very important topic. And I think whether you are a very established data professional, someone who is transitioning careers, or actually a leader, there is going to be something in this episode that's going to be for you. But before we get into the topic, can I invite you to introduce yourself, Jackie?
You can indeed. It's good to be here, Karen. So, hi everybody, I'm Jackie Clayton and I currently work for Mars Pet Care, leading one of the data science teams based out of the UK and China. So we are very much looking to drive value and grow our business and build a better experience for pet owners in the work that I'm doing at the moment. But prior to that, and the topic we're talking about today, I have spent a large portion of my career thinking about how to help data professionals, particularly in data science, but how to develop careers and how to really develop talent for organizations. And through the course of doing that work, I've set up several academies and development centers that have gone on to hopefully deliver good growth for those businesses. And I think that's a really important topic for us to be talking about for learning culture today.
I feel like you're also to me, at least, you're a pioneer in this creating data academies, because now we're seeing data academies popping in a lot of large organizations. But one of the first ones I heard about was the one at EMEA, and you're the one who brought this idea and actually brought it to life. So I'm really keen to hear about your story creating that academy.
Yeah, I was thinking it was actually 13 years ago that I did this, which feels like so long ago now, but you're absolutely right. There's academies and communities popping up in so many more organizations, which is fantastic to see. But taking myself back 13 years, I was working for EMEA and we were a growing business. We had lots of expanding insight teams, but we were growing a little bit in silos and we weren't particularly making it easy for ourselves to retain talent and provide opportunities and have a career path. So it was actually quite a persistent problem with retention. So we had great data, great clients, great problems to look at, but we just couldn't crack this one. So we took a big step back as a team and thought, what is not working here? And actually, what can we do about creating a solution to actually address that problem? And it really boiled back to we were not well equipped to have time in our roles to actually think about how do we progress, how do we bring learning into the actual roles. So everybody's great at doing the day job, but we just weren't thinking about learning at the same time. So people were getting stuck. So we set up an academy and decided that we needed to have solutions that weren't just technical training. It was much more consistent and persistent development for everybody at all points of the career. So we made a decision to invest in the academy, and I wasn't particularly thinking of leading it at that point in time, but as having led one of the teams that was particularly impacted by all the problems, I certainly had a lot to say on what I thought we could do to address them. So I thought, well, why not? Let's have a go. Let's see what we can bring to life here. And that was the beginning of what then was a best part of a 10-year journey for me.
So, and what an exciting 10 years. I have to say I've only heard so many praises from this academy that was set up at EMEA. And when I arrived in the UK, it's one of the organizations I really wanted to join for that exact reason. So it just felt like learning and developing was so important to the organization that I was thinking, but I want to do that as well. And all the analysts I found that came from there, and they were so strong. I was very jealous. Uh,
I think one of the things was really at the heart of when we set out to do that was that it had to be integrated into the roles. It was developed by the team for the team. It wasn't something that sat sort of separately as part of HR. It was very much baked into the data and analytics and the insight teams, and created by them for them. And I think that was the one thing that was very non-negotiable from the start, that it's very much with the support of our HR colleagues, but it very much sat within our data team. So that probably explains why so many of them have gone on to do similar things in their own roles that they're in now.
Yeah, I hear that. So I know, so learning and development, as I said, is very important to me, but sometimes I do wonder, but am I wearing an HR hat or something? I want to really stay in data, and it feels like there is a fine line between the two from time to time.
Yeah. I think that the way that I've always approached it is to include our HR colleagues in the decision, because they're obviously very aware of the talent strategies, but it does help present the evidence that actually we can create development paths within, but they do have to be integrated into what the team are doing, because most data scientists and people in other sort of advanced analytic roles want to stay very close to the work. So if we can weave it in together, it becomes a much more harmonious way of actually growing the team.
Yeah, and you know what you're talking about, weaving it into the work and making sure that they stay close to what it is that they're doing on a day to day. That means that it also adds value to the organization, because they are getting better at doing what they're actually doing. And I know we hear a lot about, when people are running employee engagement surveys, a lot of the results you get is, I don't see how to develop in my role. I don't see how I can apply the work that, well, not the work, but the learnings I've done from a course or something inside my day to day. But the way you built it was really around that, making sure that you can implement things, but also share the learnings with other people in your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a message I've heard a lot, and definitely something to sort of touch on again today is, how do you break out of that if that's the position you think you're experiencing in your current role or your current team? Like, if you don't have the luxury of an academy, which not every team has one, or is big enough to perhaps justify one, how can you use some of the things perhaps that I learned along the way, but in a simpler context where maybe you've got to kickstart that yourself? So definitely got some thoughts on how you can do that.
Oh yeah, I would love to talk about that, because in the last couple of years, I've been working in bigger organizations, but as you know, before, organizations I worked in were maximum 100 people. So that means the data team was tiny. And a lot of my friends as well, they want to look into learning and development, but they're saying there is not enough time, there is not the resource, and sometimes they don't even know where to start to create not necessarily a full program, but to look into learning and development and make sure that the talent stays in the team.
Yeah, and I think that's something I remember very acutely from the time when I was running the academy, is that anyone can make a difference, anyone and everyone. It's not we might not be formally coached to be trainers or learning professionals, but we are data professionals and have got a huge amount we can share. So I think that's one of the first things I'd recognise is, well, whatever team you're in, everyone in that team has got something they can bring to it. So sharing the ownership of your learning culture for your team is quite important. I don't see this as just the leader of the team's responsibility. Everybody in the team can play their part. So I've yet to find a team that aren't working at capacity and have got workload pressures. Not sure they exist, but if we share the work across the team, it generally means something will get done and the culture kind of continues, and it's not at risk of being sidelined by a particular work pressure. It just becomes a much normal part of the conversation. So I personally like sharing the learning responsibility across the team, because as the leader of the team, it also gives me an opportunity to interact with people more than just my direct reports, and that's a great way for me to get to know them better and understand their potential, but also put that trust in them and signal to them as a bit of a role model that this is really important to me, and put that responsibility into their hands as well. So I've always taken that approach to sharing that responsibility, and it's brilliant at uniting teams in my experience, which in more remote situations that we often find ourselves in now, or in a smaller team, it brings the team together really effectively.
Yeah, I love that. So everyone has a say, everyone can share their own learnings, but I wonder how in that kind of situations you make sure that everyone participates rather than being the same person doing it all the time, because I'm thinking there are going to be people who are going to be more inclined towards it.
100%. There
Yeah.
always are. And there always are people that are, it's exciting and enjoyable to them. And I have to say, one of the genius things that happened in the academy, and this one wasn't my idea, I have to credit others in the team for coming up with this one. We had a goal that everybody had to contribute one thing to the academy, just one. So in the whole year of the goal setting process, you had to contribute one thing. So nobody could say one item was too much. What we actually found is, once people had got the hang of it and found one thing that they could do, they often contributed many more than one thing. So, but it was such a simple, if everybody just tries to think of one area that they can lean in on, actually it does help the whole thing move forward. So
Yeah.
it's a good way to just get started. Just do one thing.
Yeah. And I guess that's one easy one to tick also of your objectives.
It's also a bit addictive, because it's amazing. People find it very flattering to be asked to lead on a particular area if you've got role models within your team that have that experience, and it challenges them to really polish their knowledge and share that back out to the team. But it is flattering, and people do like to be asked and recognized. But once you start that ball rolling, of course, they then become a go-to person, recognized for their expertise. That expertise starts to shine, so they get kind of recognition and progression off the back of that as well. So it's a very you start that ball rolling, it kind of has a lot of self momentum once you get up and running.
I love that. I love that. And so you talked a bit, so we talked about everyone in the team can take part of it. You talked about, well, you mentioned earlier the fact that the learning and development areas, it should be developed by the team and for the team as well, rather than sitting with HR. I think today a lot of organizations are using learning budgets to attract talent. And it's funny because earlier this week I was commenting on a comment on LinkedIn where they were talking about, when you go to interviews, you have to ask if there is a learning budget. But I feel like learning budgets just get thrown in there, and people have to basically, it's like, oh, here you have it. Now it's your problem kind of thing. I don't know. What's your view on that?
I think lots of teams will say, yes, we have a learning budget, but I've also worked in teams where the learning budget hasn't been spent, because you'd be surprised that people don't actually ask for it as often as you probably should. And I think there's a couple of ways of dealing with it. That great if your company has a learning budget and you can tap into that in a way that's meaningful for you, but also if they do disappear and then to get used for something else and there isn't a learning budget, actually that learning culture doesn't have to have a big price tag attached to it. So I think for me it really boils down to what do you want to learn, and what's your learning strategy, which actually, if we think about it, depending on where your starting point is and what you want to learn, and that will inform where you want to end up. How do we close that gap in the middle? So how much do we already know about a problem? Is there someone available that we can learn from? Or how fast do you need to learn? Do you already have a situation that you need to apply it to? All the answers to those sort of questions will influence, well, actually, do I need to submerge myself in some online learning right now because I literally need to learn fast and quick, and I need it in the most accessible form I can? Or am I working towards something that maybe a long-term mentor and a gradual build is a better solution? So I think it's about really understanding, where am I trying to get to, and what is the gap I'm trying to close, to think about obviously what's the best way to approach it. And that doesn't always have to be a super expensive solution. And it may need to lean more on people's experience and expertise, and whether those are internal peers or perhaps other people external to your organization, to actually build a bit more practical experience. So for me, throwing money at the problem can solve it in some situations, but it's not always the answer. So use the budget if it's there, but work out where the budget's going to help you, or whether it's a solution that needs something other than money.
Yeah. I like that. I never thought about it this way. So I know a lot of my friends have been just using their budget to buy a lot of books, for example. And I'm thinking, how much time do you have to read all these books? And me, I remember thinking, so I've used some of my budget, but I rely a lot on knowledge from the community, for example. I mean, the podcast is a great way for me to learn. So I've always been quite conscious about the fact that I was not necessarily making the most out of my budget, but listening to you talking about, how depending on what it is that you want to learn and the gap, then you might need a different avenue than actually using the money. So that's quite interesting.
I think also if you have had the benefit of investment of some budget in a whatever learning is appropriate, showing your organization that you can then share that beyond just your own personal learning, but again, bringing that back into the team, using that to then build on it and showing the real value, of course, sets a good precedent for then the company making future investment in others in the team. So I think it's also just being really, a responsible practitioner in that space to show that it's money well spent and it's bigger than just the one person that benefits from it. And if you can then apply that in your role and show the value of, well, it's made a difference. Again, I think showing that back to the people giving you that budget will help demonstrate the future needs. So you keep it healthy, because if you don't spend it, budgets that don't get spent often don't get replaced the following year. So, use it wisely, but also, in the same way we promote success in projects, use that same attitude in promoting the learning benefits as well.
That's a very good advice. No one wants it to disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're all very busy, and I'm thinking, I love the idea of sharing it back to the team. And you mentioned also you had, as an objective, someone had to share just one thing, for example. But how do we make sure that we're not really draining the time of people in the team?
Yeah, and I think this is super important, because we were all hired to do a specific role within an organization. And I think if you are in a situation where you are under a lot of pressure and it feels really hard to carve out time in your day to do this, I think we need to trying to do something and get started is really important. Don't strive for perfection. Don't keep polishing something. Making it just starting a conversation is as important as a perfectly delivered training course. So classic 80-20 sort of logic to it. So just trying to get started. I think also people think of training as a very formal thing. I don't think of it just like that. In my team right now, it can be conversations. So we will repurpose a team meeting to a brainstorm with a particular topic identified, and people will go away and do a bit of thinking about that in advance and bring their ideas to the table. But also then you can create a summary of that, or maybe a kind of, here are the top tips out of it. And we try to create something a bit more tangible out the back of it. So it's not just a conversation that's a very great if you're in the conversation and it's in the moment. If someone came into the group 2 months down the line, here's actually the takeout from it that were the kind of key points made. So you're starting to accumulate assets and host them somewhere where people can find them. And there's a lot of practicality about all of this, that people will use what they can find and where they can access it. So put it somewhere where people are likely to find it. Try and capture key points from the discussion. So it might be, oh, I found this article really useful. Well, rather than having it buried in a Teams chat from 3 months ago that nobody's going to find, just lift them out, put them in a kind of useful links section and link it to whatever the topic is, and try and just build your assets in a more on the fly kind of ad hoc way. And is it perfect? No, but it's better than doing nothing. And it creates the conversation of actually, well, I'll ask so and so because they actually had some good thoughts on this. And again, it fuels that conversation. Does anybody know about X? So I think you can do quite a lot in just getting the ball rolling. The other thing I've seen also, particularly if you're in maybe a smaller team and you don't have a role model with perhaps more experience, maybe you are the most experienced person in a particular topic. If there's a lot of pressure on, not taking time out for learning, must focus on business goals, how can you bring those two together? Because if your company is asking you to try and deliver a particular business goal, if we say, I need to learn this particular concept, technique, get more experience in whatever it is to deliver that business goal, it's now part of the deliverable. It just happens to be I've got to go on a learning curve to get there. It's not seen as separate or as some sort of nice to have or a luxury. It's an essential. I need this to do what you're asking me to do. And I've seen that work quite effectively a number of times. So that could be an angle to go down. Again, I go back to that idea of what's your learning strategy, that what support have you got within your team already that you can tap into or you could access independently, but where do you need to step out and kind of reach beyond? So we talk about using networks, you use the podcast. Where do we need that input from someone else? So again, we're quite specific about what we're going after for what purpose. So if you are a bit time poor, you can really use that time wisely. And there are so many communities now available across the industry that are relatively straightforward to tap into. And you'd be amazed at how willing and responsive these groups are.
Yeah, that's very true.
First is put the word out there and you almost certainly get something back.
Yeah, I had to stop myself from taking notes. I went from podcast host to podcast listeners for a moment. I need to stay in this conversation. So interesting. I will listen to it after so I can go back to taking my notes. So that we talked a lot about things that are happening within the data team. So I love all the tips you shared. These thing around incorporating the learning while you're actually delivering something is key. I know that's something I used a lot in my previous role when I went to work on generative AI, and I knew nothing about generative AI, and suddenly I had to be the expert in the room and all these things. But in terms of the outside of the data team, so we know there is a lot to be done around helping people understand data a bit better, and then the way we work with other teams. But how do you extend the learning culture with the rest of the organization, and really how important is it?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. So I've touched slightly on the HR linking and the talent progression, and that it's a very integrated part of your talent strategy. But I think tapping into the business understanding that you're part of an organization that wants to keep fresh, wants to keep learning. So when people say, yeah, we're at the cutting edge, it's like, well, are you really? Are you actually taking steps to do that? So I think linking how that learning relates to delivering the business priorities and that it's enhancing the delivery, not just diverting resources away from it, is the one thing that connects with pretty much everybody in a business. So I think that's important to keep that awareness quite front of mind, so people really understand that it's considered learning, as it's not just aspirational. It actually is linking into what we are trying to do as an organization. And I think the visibility of it, that it is part of how we do a great job on the products that we're working on. So we share what we've learned. It's visible how we're doing it. That can cascade as far and wide as it needs to within the organization. But I think it's got to be real and relatable so people understand how that learning is converting into something that's used in their product. The business might not be completely wanting the detail, but some simple plain English of how we've actually adopted something new that we're trying and that's led to a great outcome is a surefire way to get people on board with, like, well, actually that is important, and people are proud of it. People do speak with pride when they get that achievement. So I think it is just, again, about sort of a little bit of self-promotion of what the benefits are of that. And we do that all the time on the analytic work that we output, but we can use learning as part of that as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure we do it all the time with the work we output, but but we
Takes
want
practice.
to. We want to. And Jackie, to close the episode, I would love to know what it is that you're currently learning or are interested to learn about.
Well, I think you can't really come to work without hearing. You mentioned it a second ago, like generative AI, LLMs, and all. It's just everywhere right now, of course. But the reason I'm interested in it is that thinking about where we potentially are heading, what are other people talking about in that space, how are other people using it, because we all know it's possible, but I think it's interesting how people are transitioning, where people are transitioning, what people are feeling is good use or cautious use at this point in time, where people have perhaps had some experiences, both good and not so good. So I'm very interested in the sort of other people's experiences of that. So I quite often find myself in conversations about that at the moment. So again, an example where there's lots you can learn as a sort of theory and the practical application of how to build them. But personally, I'm quite interested with my role of like actually how do we set ourselves up to be able to do this safely and within budget and manage our experience and hopefully get it right. So that's a topic of conversation that I frequently find myself in these days.
Yeah, and I love that you are actually doing that through conversations rather than, so it really shows what you are talking about earlier. It's finding out what's the avenue to learning these things.
Yeah. And then again, then sort of bringing that back in-house and talking with people closer to home. So we're hopefully all bringing that knowledge level up through our various networks.
Yeah, love that. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for joining me on the podcast. It was a pleasure having you.
Likewise, I enjoyed seeing you today.
Thank you for listening to the Women in Data podcast.
We will be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, we would be very grateful if you could leave us a rating or a review, as it helps us not only to make the podcast more visible, but also to enhance the content.
And if you don't want to miss the next episode, follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We're also on LinkedIn.
Don't forget to register to the Women in Data community. It's free. All you need to do is head to womenindata.co.uk.
Have a great day!